Well, first of all, it's really nice to see so many people here. And before I start, I'd love to know how many of you have been flooded. So, not that many. How many people live at risk of flooding? Quite a few more. Right. Okay. Those of you that have been flooded, I'm sorry if my presentation does bring back memories for you, but I think it's only fair to share the true horrors of being flooded with everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I've been flooded on many occasions myself. The worst flood was actually in the year 2000 when I had waist-deep floodwater in my home. I was a mum with young children, a newly diagnosed son with severe autism, and we lost all his toys and his specially kitted out playroom. And obviously he had severe learning difficulties and didn't understand what was going on. My next door neighbour was agoraphobic, and to this day I've never seen a worse flood. Again, waist deep, but it had a carpet of poo, thick carpet of poo, several inches deep, running through her house from the kitchen, living room and dining room, all open plan. She was agoraphobic and hadn't even been out to have her baby. And then next door to her was an elderly lady who'd just come back from her husband's funeral. And she had the wake at her house, had the wedding photos out. She was in her 80s, went to bed that night, left the wedding photos out and was flooded. So she lost her wedding photographs as well. And that was just 3 families in one street. Now, we've all got stuff going on in our lives, haven't we? All of us. Some of you are perhaps distracted right now. When you lose your home, your sanctuary, the place you feel safe, it's really, really hard. And from that moment, really, when I realised that just 3 people in my street have been impacted so badly, what about everybody else in the great floods of the year 2000? And I decided then that I was going to look into as much as I possibly could to share recovery information with people. And also at that particular time, there was no internet. I did research how to make my home flood recoverable. And when I was flooded again in 2007, the pumping station that I'd campaigned for sadly was overwhelmed, and so the electricity took 2 of the pumps out. The third one was a generated one, and it was overwhelmed. 1 house flooded in the street, mine. It was the lowest house. So it was surface water flooding and sewage. But because I had built in recoverable repair, we were able to pump it out, sanitize it, and bring out the dehumidifiers and carry on living there. That was my light bulb moment, really. That from then on, I thought, well, local authorities and the Environment Agency and water companies manage flood risk, but they are not charged with keeping it away from our home. So I looked into what we could do to keep water away from our home, and more importantly in my book, if the water gets in, to help a home recover. So today's presentation is taken from the River Severn, where I come from. So it's local to me, and the River Severn at the moment is flooding every single year. Now, the average person's out of their home for 9 months, and just imagine if they were out for 9 months and back for 3 and out for 9 months again, how devastating that would be. So the people that I have talked to and interviewed along the length of the River Severn have made adaptations to try and minimise the amount of water, and we're talking a serious amount of water, going into the property, but enabling them to pump out, sanitise and recover afterwards. Everybody has told me that recovery from the flood is terrible. I know, I lived upstairs for 9 months. I have talked to so many people where the flood you can deal with, but not the recovery. And that will really takes a toll on people's mental health and how they fear the next flood. If people make adaptations to enable them to recover, whilst it's not a picnic, as you will see, people can light a fire, carry on living there, and not have to make an insurance claim. So this is the River Severn in its last flood, and you can see hopefully see the signpost there and how far the water comes up. It raises between 5 and 6 metres every winter, every February at the moment. So this is a couple, a retired couple, and they suffer from severe deep flooding in their property, outside their property, and you'll see in a minute the only way they can get out is by boat. And they have been rescued once by boat. Now they've invested in their own boat because they are flooded so regularly. And they knew the property flooded when they bought it, and they've been flooded 2007 and 3 more times. And the worst was certainly when you were all flooded in 2020. And just before lockdown was a horrible time for you all to flood. And I think it really took its toll on people. And you can see they are sort of professional floodies, as we call them, not flood victims. And they have tiled throughout downstairs, and they've sealed the floor with a breathable liquid and installed the electrics high up, as you can see in the middle picture. And they've raised their freezer on high up in the garage, and you can see that in the bottom right picture. And you can see that they prepare for flooding. The River Severn is quite a slow riser, so they prepare for flooding and have quite a few decorators' trestles. And they've installed flood doors and flood barriers and fitted a non-return valve as well. And you can see here, they were walking, we wouldn't advise walking through the water, but Karen is vulnerable and walked right through the flood water with poles to go and have a COVID injection. That is their lawnmower, and Eamon is very inventive, and he's now got his sit-on lawnmower rises up in the flood so it doesn't get flooded. They're retired and they sell wood to supplement their income, and they hadn't tied the wood down. And I think people don't realise the devastation that a river can bring, and all their wood pile was washed into the garden, and obviously there's their boat that they go to Tesco's in. But I must tell you, despite being flooded like that, the flood water comes in, they pump it out with their pumps and sanitise. They don't make insurance claims. And they can light their fires. They've got a number of log burners. They light their fires, open the windows, and get the dehumidifiers out and carry on living there. Now, those of you that attended the launch of the Be Flood Ready house in Wallingford will have met Nick and Annie, but they weren't able, for security reasons, to share their photographs. And you can see where they live. They live very rurally. The flood water in their garden is above head height. They knew the house flooded, and they got it for a song for that reason. So that it is a lovely house, but it does flood every single year, and you can see that it's quite severe flooding. But they've really taken it on, and the former owner started to make it flood resilient and flood recoverable, really, and they have gone the whole hog. So their house has been tanked, and they've had cavity membranes installed. If you don't know what they are, do come to the Floodmobile, because we've got an example. Everybody along the River Severn, because the river water stays up for days and days, they swear by pumping, and they've got pumps under the kitchen and under all the living rooms, and some further pumps down the cellar. They've got stone floors throughout, all the plug sockets are raised up, and they've got flood barriers fitted to the doors, and because they're so rural, they got a backup generator for the pumps during the power cut. And you can see that they've also got ground source heat pumps, which have been sited higher up. They've got 2 lots of flood barriers because the front door porch is only single skin brick, and they pop a puddle pump in there, and that keeps the water right down to puddles after its name. And they've even got their beehives lifted onto breeze blocks. And last time they were flooded over Christmas, and they've got their garden sun house up on stilts, and they went and waded out there and toasted everybody with champagne from their summer house. And I know that they've got some friends in the audience, and they will know that that's what they do. They make the best of absolutely everything. An amazing couple. And now this terrace of houses is right on the riverbank in Worcester. So they've got a small front garden, steps down to the towpath, and then the River Severn. So everybody that lives there knows they're at risk of flooding. One of them has said to me that they knew they would flood once every 9 years, and that was doable, not every year. She's in her 70s and really struggles with it, but it is a very complicated place to build a flood alleviation scheme. So they've all adapted their homes to allow them to flood, recover, and stay living there. So I will tell you two different scenarios. One is Ian, and he was absolutely adamant that he wanted to keep the River Severn out of his house. Now, it's really difficult when the floodwater stays up for a long time. In a flashy flood, it's perfectly possible, but if the floodwater lurks about, it is more difficult. But this is what he's done. So he's got flood doors and flood windows, and the flood has come up as high as the window, and he said it was a surreal experience seeing fish swimming by. So, yes. He's got non-return valves to stop what happened to me. I had poo coming up through my toilets, which was great. He's got puddle pumps. They all swear by puddle pumps. And we have got a pump geek here, Simon Crowther. If you want to ask some technical things about pumping, he's just over there. Do ask him in the break. And also all their electrics are raised up. And you can see they've painted a slurry on the wall. It's a waterproof, breathable slurry, so it allows the house to breathe, but will stop the water from coming in. Just a minute. And also, he's got a flood door with an escape hatch, and he has opened it and tried to climb out. He's in his 60s and he's fit and able to do it. And this was the last flood he had, and you can see literally, you saw the volume of water. He kept it out to puddles. So he was able to then pump the rest out, mop it up, sanitize it, and he's so brave. He only puts his sofas on little blocks like this, and you can see he's got his cupboards up on legs. And again, once the river had gone, he was back to normal very quickly with no insurance claim. And this is Lynn in the same terrace of houses, has decided she's just going to let it in. She's not going to try to stop. And she built an extension when she moved in, and she knew she'd lived on the avenue for a long time. She knew she would flood, but she was the one that said to me, once every 9 years is doable, but not every year. The worst flood was when she was away on holiday and couldn't prepare, because everybody on the River Severn has a household flood plan. They know exactly what they're going to do when they flood. So this is the flood water in her house. And you can see she's got everything up high. Her kitchen doesn't actually come down to the floor. It's a floating kitchen. Doesn't cost a lot of money. You can get it from Wren's. And she's got marble tiled floors, closed cell insulation under the floor, and limelight plaster on the walls. And she's also cut her tiles, instead of having skirting boards, she's cut tiles into the plaster so that they don't take the water up the wall and wet the plaster. And instead of metal beading down the edge of a corner of a wall, she's used plastic. And she's since she's done all this, she hasn't made a flood insurance claim and can recover very quickly. You can see where she's sited all her white goods in a cupboard. And you can see a better picture here of the floating kitchen with nice glass bricks underneath. And she's also got stone steps, so her wooden steps don't get ruined. And again, she pumps out, sanitizes, and carries on living there. It's not easy. It really isn't easy, but it's far better than being out of your home, living in alternative accommodation for 9 months. And then there's Irene and Michael in Bewdley. They are quite an elderly couple, and Michael isn't in the best health, so they struggle. But they've lived in the house for 22 years, and they knew the house had flooded before, and they took immediate steps to reduce their flood risk before they'd even flooded. And they've had many near misses, and they didn't actually flood till February 2020, lockdown time, and it was just below their raised plug sockets. So you can see they've got a nice stainless steel kitchen and tiled floors. They relocated their boiler high up, and they've also got a garage, and they sort of build a funny balcony on top of the garage. You can see it in the sort of right-hand picture. And they actually watch the River Severn rising from that, and they know from their knowledge when to start moving stuff. Again, they've got a flood plan. They've installed flood doors and flood barriers, because once you've shut a flood door, you can't get out of your house. And so they installed a barrier as well, so if they did need to evacuate, they could do. They've also used a lot of pumping from their cellar and non-return valves to stop any backflow of the water. And they've also quite determined to keep a carpet in their living room, so they use a floodgate that doesn't have any fixtures and fittings between the hall and the living room, and the water doesn't get in there because of the pumping. And then we always overlook businesses, because we most of us can get flood insurance through the government-backed Flood Re scheme, but businesses really struggle to get insurance, and so I've included a few businesses as well. And this is a huge sort of antique centre, and it's right on the riverside. They've got lovely tea rooms in Ironbridge, and Donna and Nigel are amazing people. Individual companies put their crafts and their wares in there, so she is very aware she's responsible for looking after their belongings that are up for sale. And the business has flooded 10 times, and in fact the business flooded 2 or 3 times in the last 3 years. They have amazing backup of volunteers from the community. So the minute they know a flood is coming, they call out to the community, and the community trained volunteers arrive and help her move things out of the way. So they've got pallets, and they stack everything on pallets that they've got housed somewhere else. Their freezers are put onto the pallets. All the kitchen units are on casters, so they can be disconnected and wheeled to the ground. And they've got a mezzanine level, and they put everything up in the mezzanine level, and so they don't lose stuff. It's hard work, but they don't lose stuff. And in comes the flood water here. They've got slot-in flood barriers to all the entrances, and they've got pumps and puddle pumps, and they put a ton weight on the iron drain lid to stop the sewage from coming up. And they've got cameras everywhere, so they can monitor the situation from their nearby home. And they literally, when the floodwater's gone, their band of volunteers come, because we all know floodwater is filthy. It leaves sludge behind. Though somebody has told me, if you chuck fairy liquid and disinfectant down as the water's going and agitate the water leaves your house clean. And I have passed this on to them, and they're going to do it. And in fact, I passed it on to somebody in Diglis Avenue, and she tweeted me to say that her house, the floodwater had gone and her house was sparkling clean. So that's a little hint for you to remember. Michael in Shrewsbury hasn't really coped very well with mental health with being flooded. He regrets buying the house. Everybody else, without exception, don't regret buying their house, but Michael, who is an architect, doesn't really cope at all, and is regularly on the phone to me, even when it's not flooding. And his garden runs down to the banks of the mighty River Severn. But you can see here, with this really powerful picture, that because of property flood resilience measures, the slot-in barriers, he manages to keep the water out, and he just reinforced the pillar here to take the volume of the water that the barrier was holding back. And you can see it here in place when the flood's not there. And he's got 2 powerful sump pumps, swears by them, just to cope with any leakage, but he didn't actually get any from these barriers, and there's some in the Floodmobile if you want to see them. And he's also tanked his walls downstairs, and he's got large tiles. He put small tiles on the first time, and he didn't use waterproof grout and adhesive. He did the second time with big tiles, and they've stayed down. And so he's tanked, and he's used a lime plaster, and he's also used a magnesium oxide boarding, which is also called dragon board, and it can be wet and recover. Again, we've got examples of that in the Floodmobile if you haven't been around the Floodmobile. And his existing stairs, again, he rebuilt with solid oak. Just so you know that wood generally can survive a flood. Oak, pine, mahogany doesn't need throwing away. It can survive. And again, he's got a puddle pump to mitigate any water. And then this is a small coffee shop in Shrewsbury run by a lovely couple. And they've lived there for 5 years, and the shop has not been flooded since the great floods of 2000, but recently has begun to flood 5 times in only 2.5 years. In 2020, they were flooded twice in the matter of only 9 days. So no sooner had they reopened after the first flood than they were flooded again. And being a young couple, they haven't got much money and don't get flood insurance. So with government grants, they did install barriers, and then they rethought the way they kitted out the shop. So they've all got metal legs, and they use cheap OSB boarding, and it's pinned to the wall. It looks sort of industrial chic, and they can take it off and replace it if it needs to, but he hasn't needed to yet. And you wouldn't know that was put in for flood resilience. It's just a sort of industrial chic look. And you can see here they've done the same with their countertops, and everything is raised up, and they can move things up high. But he did say that the barriers and the sump pumps were an absolute game changer. And last time he was flooded overnight. He got up, they both got up early, they cleaned out, they sanitised, and the community were there to help them. And at 9 o'clock in the morning, they opened the coffee shop, and the community were queuing up outside to support them by buying coffee and buying food there. So they really got it sort of licked. It's not a picnic, but it saves bringing businesses to their knees. So you can find out, I've got at least 40 case studies in my property flood resilience e-mag. I've travelled all over the country talking to people. You can find this on just type Flood Mary into the website, into Google, and you'll find all the stories. It's a free download. Everything on my website is free, and I've written quite a few books and guides, so do visit it. I've done a flood recovery guide as well, and also the household guide to property flood resilience. Some of you will have probably got a copy, but there are copies in the Floodmobile, but you can download it again from my website. And that has every product that's in the market, and where to find it and how they work in the guide. So that's me done. Thank you for listening. And I thought I'd finished with a very pretty picture of dogs. Now, those dogs' home was flooded, and they had nowhere to do, their worst. So they had to go in a boat for quite a way to be taken to find some dry land. And so even animals suffer as well. So thank you very much.